A young man ages out of the system with nothing but a faded photograph of a family ranch he's never seen. But what he discovered there wasn't just about land or money. It was about a history he was never meant to forget, and a choice that would define the rest of his life. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing but a dream or a memory, you know this feeling. Stick with me, and let's see where this road goes together. Hit that subscribe button if you're on a journey of your own, because these are the stories we need to share. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to exist, at least according to the state of California. For 10 years, I had been a case number, a file in a gray cabinet, a line item in a budget. Now, with the stroke of a pen on a discharge form, I was just Leo Holloway, a name with no history attached. Ms. Gable, the director of the Northgate Youth Authority, slid a thin manila folder across her desk. Her face was a mask of practiced neutrality, the kind you develop after seeing hundreds of kids just like me walk out her door, most of them heading straight for a life that would eventually lead them back into another kind of system. She said, her voice flat. Quote 1. She pushed a gray plastic box toward me, the kind used for storing old office supplies. Quote, I didn't need to open it. I knew what was inside. In 10 years, I had accumulated almost nothing. A few worn paperbacks, a cheap digital watch, and a single folded photograph. I ran my thumb over the lid of the box, the plastic cool and impersonal. And that's everything? I asked, though I already knew the answer. That's everything the state has on record for you, she clarified. She handed me a bus ticket and a cash voucher for $200. The ticket is one way to Redemption Creek, Wyoming. That's the last known address for your next of kin, a grandfather, Arthur Holloway. The voucher is your severance from the state. Spend it wisely. My heart gave a weak flutter at the mention of my grandfather. I hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in a decade. After my parents died, I lived with him for 2 years on his ranch, or so I'd been told. My memories of that time were fragmented, like shattered glass, full of sharp edges and missing pieces, the smell of pine needles and damp earth, the rumble of a truck engine, the warmth of a large hand holding mine. And then, nothing. One day, men in uniforms came and I was taken away. They told me he'd abandoned me. Is he still there? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ms. Gable consulted her screen, typing with 2 fingers. The property records are complicated. It appears the Holloway Ranch was flagged for delinquent taxes years ago. It's likely been seized by the county or sold off. We have no current information on Arthur Holloway's whereabouts. He's presumed deceased. Presumed deceased. The words hung in the air, cold and final, abandoned and then gone. It was the story I'd been telling myself for years. I picked up the box. It was lighter than air. The bus ticket felt like a sentence. Wyoming, a place I couldn't even picture, she said, her eyes already moving to the next file on her desk. I was dismissed. I walked down the long, sterile hallway for the last time. The smell of bleach and boiled vegetables, the distant shouting of younger kids in the yard, the squeak of my state-issued shoes on the linoleum. I was leaving it all behind, but I had no idea what I was walking toward. Outside, the California sun was bright and indifferent. I sat on a bench by the bus stop, the city's noise a roaring wall around me. I finally opened the box. Inside, just as I'd expected, were the books, the watch, and the photograph. I picked it up. It was creased and soft from years of being handled. The photo showed a rustic wooden house with a wide porch, nestled in a valley of rolling hills. Behind it, a snow-capped mountain range stood like a guardian, A tall, weathered-looking man with kind eyes and a thick mustache stood on the porch, his arm around a much younger version of me, a gap-toothed kid with a wild mop of hair. My grandfather, Arthur, and the ranch. This was the only proof I had that I had ever belonged to someone, to somewhere. Miss Gable said it was gone, lost to taxes, a ghost on a piece of paper. But the bus ticket in my pocket was for Redemption Creek. It felt like a contradiction, a loose thread in the story I'd been told. I looked at the $200. It wasn't enough to start a life. It was barely enough to survive a week. I had no one, no skills to speak of besides keeping my head down and staying out of trouble. I could have torn up the ticket, tried to disappear into the anonymity of the city. It might have been the smarter move, but as I stared at the photo, at the faint image of a life I'd barely lived, I felt a pull I couldn't explain. It wasn't hope, not exactly. It was something quieter, deeper. It was the need to stand on the ground where that picture was taken, even if it was owned by strangers now. I needed to see the ghost for myself. I needed to know what was at the end of that one-way ticket. I folded the photograph carefully, put it in my pocket, and waited for the bus that would take me away from the only life I could remember, toward the memory of one I had lost. The bus ride was a 3-day journey through a landscape that slowly bled all the color out of itself. We left the sprawling, vibrant chaos of Southern California and climbed into the high desert, a world of pale sand and scorched rock. Then combed the endless plains of Nevada and Utah, vast, empty canvases of brown and gray under an enormous sky. I watched the world go by through the grimy window, feeling like a ghost myself. I was in a liminal space, no longer a ward of the state, but not yet a part of anything else. I was just a body in motion, hurtling toward a destination that probably didn't exist anymore. I kept my head down, my worn backpack on my lap. The other passengers were a collection of weary travelers, families on a budget, people running from something or to something. No one paid me any mind, and for that I was grateful. Years in the system had taught me the value of invisibility. You draw less attention, you attract less trouble. I ate the cheap sandwiches I'd bought before I left and rationed my water, making the $200 stretch as far as it could. At night, I'd curl up against the window, the vibration of the engine a constant, low hum. I didn't sleep much. My mind was a whirlwind of half-formed memories and anxieties. The face of my grandfather in the photograph, the cold finality in Ms. Gable's voice, the echoing emptiness of the word Chateau-9. On the third morning, the landscape began to change again. The flatlands gave way to rolling hills, then to the jagged dark peaks of distant mountains. The sky seemed bigger here, a deeper, more piercing blue. The bus driver announced over the crackling intercom, "10." My stomach tightened into a cold knot. This was it, the end of the line. The bus pulled into a small, dusty lot next to a building that served as the station, the diner, and the post office all in one. When I stepped off the bus, the air was the first thing I noticed. It was thin and cold and smelled of pine and dust and something else, something clean and wild. It was so different from the thick, smoggy air of the city that it felt like I was breathing for the first time. The town of Redemption Creek wasn't much more than a single main street lined with old brick and wooden buildings. A general store, a saloon, a feed supply, a small sheriff's office. It looked like a movie set for a Western, only tired and real. I shouldered my backpack and walked into the diner. A few old-timers sat at the counter, nursing cups of coffee. They all turned to look at me when I entered, their gazes lingering for a moment before turning away. I was clearly an outsider. A waitress with a tired but kind face came over. I said, my voice sounded rough. I cleared my throat. 13. Her expression shifted subtly, a flicker of recognition of something like pity. Quote, 14. She poured my coffee. Quote, till 15. Quote, 16. I asked, dreading the answer. She shook her head, wiping down the counter with a rag. Quote, 17. Her words confirmed what Miss Gable had said. It was a ruin, a piece of land tangled up in legal battles I couldn't possibly understand. Still, I had to see it. Thank you, I said, putting $1 on the counter. As I left, one of the old-timers at the counter called out, You kin to Arthur? I hesitated at the door. He was my grandfather, I said softly. The man nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. He was a good man, stubborn as they come. He took a sip of his coffee. The world did him wrong. His words followed me out into the cold Wyoming air. The world did him wrong. It was the first time anyone had ever suggested that the story I'd been told, that my grandfather had simply given me up, might not be the whole truth. It was a tiny crack in the foundation of my lonely world, and I didn't know what to make of it. I pulled the photograph from my pocket and looked at the smiling man on the porch. Then I turned toward Route 26 and started walking. The 5 miles to the ranch stretched out before me, a ribbon of cracked asphalt leading into the vast, silent wilderness. The walk was longer than I expected. The town disappeared behind me quickly, leaving only the road, the rolling plains, and the mountains looming in the distance. The sun was high, but the wind had a sharp, cold edge to it. Cars were few and far between, and the ones that did pass slowed down to let the drivers get a good look at the stranger walking on the shoulder. I kept my head down, my worn boots kicking up dust with every step. The silence was immense, broken only by the wind and the cry of a hawk circling high above. It was a lonely sound, but it wasn't an empty one. The city was full of noise that made you feel alone. This silence was different. It felt ancient, full of secrets. After about an hour, I saw it. A dirt road branching off to the left, marked by a faded wooden sign that was too weathered to read. This had to be it. I turned onto the road, and the world grew even quieter. The dirt was packed hard, rutted from years of rain and neglect. The trees grew thicker here, tall pines that whispered in the wind. I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, a flicker of a memory of being in a truck bouncing along a road just like this one, a small hand gripping the dashboard. I walked for another 20 minutes, my anticipation and dread growing with each step. And then I saw the gate. It was just as the waitress had described. 2 massive wooden posts, gray and splintered with age, and a rusted metal gate hanging crookedly from one hinge. The name, quote, 23 quote, was still visible, forged into an arch over the top, though the letters were flaking and obscured by rust. It was real. I pushed the gate. It groaned in protest, but swung open enough for me to slip through. The driveway was a long, winding path, overgrown with weeds that scraped at my jeans. And then the trees cleared, and I saw it. The house. My breath caught in my throat. It was the house from the photograph. It was sagging in places, the paint peeling away to reveal the bare, weathered wood beneath. The porch steps were bowed, and a few windows were boarded up. It looked smaller than I remembered, sadder, but it was undeniably the same place. It stood there against the backdrop of the mountains, a lonely sentinel guarding a forgotten story. My story. I walked slowly up the path, my boots crunching on the gravel. The closer I got, the more derelict it seemed. The yard was a tangle of weeds and wildflowers. A swing set lay on its side, rusted chains wrapped around the frame. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, my heart pounding a heavy, painful rhythm in my chest. This was it, the place I was from, the place that had let me go. I felt a wave of grief so intense it almost buckled my knees. Grief for the family I'd lost, for the childhood I never had, for this beautiful, broken home. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photograph, holding it up. The image in my hand and the reality before me were two ends of the same long, sad story. In the photo, the house was alive, cared for. Now, it was a tomb. Miss Gable was right, the waitress was right. There was nothing for me here, just a painful reminder of everything I'd lost. I should have turned around right then, walked back to town, and used what little money I had to get on a bus to anywhere else. But I couldn't. I had to go inside. I climbed the creaking steps onto the porch, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I tried the front door, locked. I peered through a grimy window into a dark living room, where furniture sat under ghostly white sheets. I walked the perimeter of the house, checking windows, looking for a way in. Around the back, near the kitchen door, was a small overturned flower pot sitting on a loose flagstone. And then it hit me, a memory so clear and sudden it was like a jolt of electricity. If you're ever locked out, Leo, always check under the grumpy gnome. My grandfather's voice, deep and warm. There was no gnome, but I knelt and lifted the edge of the flagstone. Underneath, covered in dirt and cobwebs, was a single, tarnished brass key. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It felt warm, impossibly so, as if someone had just left it there for me. I took a deep breath, walked back to the front door, and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a heavy, grating click. The door swung inward, opening into a world of dust and shadows. The air inside the house was thick and stale, heavy with the scent of old wood, dust, and a faint lingering smell of pipe tobacco. It was the scent of a life that had been abruptly paused. Sunlight filtered through the grimy windows in long, hazy beams, illuminating swirling motes of dust. Everything was draped in white sheets, turning the furniture into lumpy, anonymous shapes. It was an eerie, silent world, a museum of a life I was supposed to have lived. I stepped inside, pulling the door closed behind me. The click of the latch echoed through the stillness. I was an intruder in my own past. I walked slowly into the living room, my boots leaving clean prints in the thick layer of dust on the floorboards. I reached out and pulled the sheet off a large armchair near the stone fireplace. The fabric underneath was a worn plaid, faded but intact. I could almost picture my grandfather sitting there, reading a book, a plume of smoke rising from his pipe. I ran my hand over the armrest, half expecting to feel some residual warmth, some echo of his presence. There was only cold fabric. I moved through the downstairs rooms like a ghost myself. The dining room, with a long table and 6 chairs, all under a single, massive sheet. The kitchen, where old tin canisters labeled, quote, 24, quote, 25, quote, 26, sat in a neat row on the counter, coated in dust. An old-fashioned calendar was still hanging on the wall, frozen on a single month. October, 10 years ago, the month I was taken. My throat grew tight. He hadn't just moved on. It was like he'd walked out the door one day and never came back. The feeling of hopelessness began to creep back in, cold and familiar. This place was just a collection of decaying objects. It held no answers, only more questions, more pain. Miss Gable's words echoed in my head, lost to taxes, presumed deceased. I was chasing a ghost. I was about to turn and leave, to accept the finality of it all, when I saw the desk. It was in a small study off the living room, a heavy dark wood roll-top desk. Unlike the other furniture, it wasn't covered. It was as if it had been left out on purpose. An invitation. The top was closed, locked in place. I tried the drawers, all locked. Frustrated, I ran my hands over the surface, looking for a key, a hidden latch, anything. My fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible seam in the wood paneling on the side. I pressed it. Nothing happened. I pressed harder, and a section of the paneling clicked and popped open, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was another brass key, smaller than the one for the front door. It fit the lock on the roll top. With a deep breath, I turned the key. The mechanism inside groaned, and I was able to slide the wooden cover up. The interior of the desk was a maze of pigeonholes and small drawers, all surprisingly neat. There were stacks of old bills, a tarnished silver pen, a pair of reading glasses. It was a time capsule of my grandfather's life. I started pulling open the small drawers, one by one. They were filled with mundane things, paper clips, stamps, spare buttons. I was about to give up when I opened the last, widest drawer at the bottom. It seemed empty. I ran my hand along the bottom, feeling for anything I might have missed. My fingers snagged on a slight imperfection in the wood. It was a tiny leather tab. I pulled on it, and the entire bottom of the drawer lifted up, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. My heart hammered against my ribs. Lying in the shallow space was a thick, yellowed envelope. On the front, written in a strong, steady hand, were 2 words. For Leo. My name. He had written my name. He had left this for me. My hands shook so badly I could barely pick it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. The seal on the back had been broken and resealed with a piece of tape, as if he'd added to it over time. I sank into the dusty desk chair, the leather creaking in protest. I tore open the envelope. Inside were several folded sheets of paper, filled with the same strong handwriting. I unfolded the first page and began to read. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, then it means 2 things. First, it means you've grown into a young man, and you found your way home. I never doubted you would. You have the Holloway spirit in you, and that spirit always finds its way back to the mountains. I am so proud of the man I know you have become. But second, it means that I am gone, and that I failed to come back for you myself. For that, my boy, I am sorry. I am more sorry than these words can ever say. Tears pricked my eyes, blurring the ink. I wiped them away with the back of my dusty hand and kept reading. They told you I abandoned you. I know they did. It's the easiest story, the one that closes the file and makes everything neat. But it's not the truth. The truth is, I had to let you go to save you. There are men, Leo, powerful men who wanted this land, not for the beauty of it, but for what's underneath it. They tried to buy me out, then they tried to scare me out. When my son, your father, stood up to them, he and your mother had an accident. I could never prove it, but I knew. After they were gone, you were all I had left. They started pressuring me again, threatening me, and they made it clear they saw you as leverage, a way to break me. I was getting sick then. My heart wasn't what it used to be. I couldn't protect you properly. Sending you away was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was like tearing out my own heart. But I knew the state, for all its faults, would keep you safe and anonymous until you were a man, until you could come back here and fight for yourself. This house, this land. It's not just a place, Leo, it's your inheritance. It's your story. Don't let them take it from you. They will have told you it was lost to taxes, but I took care of that. There are secrets in this house, protections I put in place for you. You are not starting from nothing. You are standing on a foundation I built with my whole life. Start by looking where the sun rises first. It will always show you the way. All my love, Grandpa Arthur. I read the letter 3 times, the words sinking into me like rain into dry earth. He didn't abandon me, he protected me. The story that had defined my entire life The story of being unwanted was a lie. It was replaced by a new one, a story of sacrifice, of a grandfather's desperate love. I sat there in the dusty silence of his study, the letter clutched in my hand, and I cried. I cried for the years of loneliness, for the pain of feeling worthless. I cried for the grandfather I barely knew, but who had loved me enough to let me go. And for the first time in 10 years, my tears weren't tears of despair. They were tears of grief, yes, but also of a fierce, burning gratitude. The room was no longer a tomb, it was a sanctuary, and the house was no longer a ruin, it was a map. And I had my first clue, quote, 28. Quote, the grief that had washed over me slowly receded, leaving something new in its place. Purpose. My grandfather's words had rewritten my past, and now they were offering me a future. I stood up from the desk, the letter folded carefully and placed in my jacket pocket, its weight a comforting presence against my chest. Quote 29. The riddle echoed in my mind. It was a simple, poetic instruction. The sun rises in the east. I needed to find the easternmost part of the house. I walked through the rooms, checking my orientation. The front of the house faced south, looking down the valley. The kitchen was on the west side to catch the evening light. That left the back corner of the house, a small room I had initially dismissed as a storage space or a mudroom. It had a single, large window facing directly east, toward the jagged line of mountains that would catch the very first rays of dawn. This had to be the place. The room was small and paneled in dark, knotty pine. It was mostly empty, save for a simple wooden bench beneath the window and a few hooks on the wall. The floor was made of wide wooden planks, scuffed and worn. I got down on my hands and knees, my eyes scanning every inch of the floor. I ran my hands over the planks, feeling for anything unusual, a loose board, a hidden latch, a hollow sound. Under the window, where the morning sun would fall most directly, one of the boards felt slightly different. When I pressed on the edge, it gave way, just a fraction of an inch. My heart started to race. I didn't have any tools, so I used my fingers to pry at the edge of the board. The wood was old, and splinters dug into my skin, but I barely noticed. Slowly, painstakingly, I worked it loose. It lifted up with a soft groan, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity in the subfloor. And nestled inside that cavity was a heavy, dark green metal box, the kind soldiers use for ammunition. It was cold to the touch. It had a heavy-duty latch secured with a small, rusty padlock. Of course, it was locked. My grandfather was a man who believed in layers of protection. I felt a surge of frustration, followed by a new determination. There had to be a key. The key to the front door was hidden outside. The key to the desk was hidden in a secret panel. This key would be hidden too. But where? I thought back to the clues, to the feeling of this house. Everything was intentional. I stood up and looked around the small room again. My eyes landed on the only decoration on the walls. A faded, oval-framed portrait of a woman with a kind, gentle smile, and eyes that seemed to look right at me. My grandmother, I presumed. Her name was Eleanor. A vague memory surfaced. The portrait was hanging from a single nail. On a hunch, I carefully lifted the portrait off the wall, and there, hanging on the nail behind it, was a small, ornate iron key. It was a perfect match for the padlock. My hands were shaking again as I knelt by the box. I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff from disuse, but with a bit of force, it turned. The lock clicked open. I lifted the heavy lid of the box, my breath held tight in my chest. The contents were neatly arranged. On top was a thick legal document tied with a blue ribbon. I carefully untied it and unfolded the papers. It was the deed to the Halloway Ranch. 500 acres, the house, the barn, and all structures. And my name was on it, Leo Halloway. In a trust established by Arthur Halloway to be transferred to my full ownership on my 18th birthday. Stapled to the deed were receipts from the county tax office. The property taxes had been paid in full every year for the last 10 years. The payments were made from an anonymous trust account managed by a law firm in town. My grandfather hadn't lost the ranch. He had saved it for me. Underneath the deed was a thick stack of letters, all from the same company, quote 30. They were offers to purchase the ranch starting from 10 years ago. The first offer was for a respectable sum. The subsequent letters, one every few months, showed the offers getting progressively lower, the tone growing more aggressive, more demanding. The last letter was dated only 2 months ago. It was a final, insultingly low offer, with a barely veiled threat about taking action to seize the property for, quote 31, quote, if the offer wasn't accepted. And at the very bottom of the box, there was one more thing. Another envelope, smaller than the first, with my name on it. I opened it. The note inside was short, and the handwriting a little shakier than in the first letter, as if written in a hurry. Leo, finding this means you're smarter than they'll ever give you credit for. Good, you'll need to be. The deed is yours and the taxes are paid, but the trust I set up to pay them is almost dry. It will run out in 1 month. The moment it does, Blackwood will pounce. They have been watching this place like vultures. They know the value of what's here. Do not trust them. Do not talk to them. There is a lawyer in town, Evelyn Albright. Her father was my friend and helped me set up the trust. She can be trusted. Go to her. Show her this. She will explain the stakes. Be strong, son. The real fight is just beginning. I sat back on my heels. The letter, the deed, and the threatening offers from Blackwood spread out on the floor around me. The world was tilting on its axis. An hour ago, I was a destitute orphan with nothing but a photograph. Now, I was a landowner, the inheritor of a decade-long fight against a faceless corporation. My grandfather hadn't just left me a home, he had left me a battle, and the clock was ticking. I had 1 month. Now, hold on. I remember sitting there on that dusty floor, the whole world tilting, the smell of old wood and secrets filling the air. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress my grandfather had built for me with paper and ink and sheer stubborn will. It was a legacy, but it was also a burden. If you've ever had a moment like that, a moment where everything you thought you knew was turned completely upside down, let me know in the comments. We're a community of people who get what it's like to have the ground shift beneath your feet. It's a terrifying and strangely clarifying feeling, isn't it? Now, let's get back to that second letter and the fight it was telling me I had to take on. The weight of my grandfather's final words settled on me. The real fight is just beginning. I was no fighter. I was a survivor. My entire life had been about avoiding conflict, making myself small, staying off the radar. But my grandfather's letters had planted a seed of something else inside me. A sense of obligation, of legacy. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was about honoring the man who had sacrificed everything for me. I carefully packed everything back into the metal box, except for the second letter in the deed. I hid the box back under the floorboard, replacing it just as I'd found it, and hung my grandmother's portrait back on the wall. The house felt different now, charged with purpose. I had a name, Evelyn Albright. I had a deadline, 1 month. I locked the front door behind me, pocketing the old brass key. It felt like it belonged to me now. The walk back to Redemption Creek was faster, my steps fueled by a nervous energy. The town that had seemed so sleepy and forgotten just hours ago now looked like a potential battleground. I found the office of Albright and Albright, attorneys at law, in a small brick building just off Main Street. The name was painted on the glass door in faded gold leaf. It was an old, established place. I pushed the door open, a small bell announcing my arrival. The office was quiet, filled with the smell of old paper and lemon polish. A woman sat behind a large wooden desk, her back to me, focused on some papers. She looked to be in her late 40s with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and a no-nonsense expression. She asked without turning around. Quote, 30. I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She swiveled in her chair, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, took me in from head to toe. She noted my worn clothes, my dusty boots, my general air of displacement. I could see the skepticism on her face. I swallowed hard. Quote, 35. Her professional mask slipped for just a second. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise and something else. Recognition. Quote, 36, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. Quote, 37. Quote, 38, I said simply. Quote, 39. I stepped forward and placed the deed and my grandfather's second letter on her desk. She picked up the letter first, her eyes scanning the page quickly. A frown creased her brow. Then she examined the deed, her expression growing more serious. She looked from the papers back to my face, studying me. My father spoke of you, she said finally, her tone now all business. He helped Arthur set up the Halloway Homestead Trust 10 years ago. It was a brilliant piece of legal maneuvering, designed to protect the property for you until you came of age. Your grandfather poured every last cent he had into it. She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen on her desk. And he was right about the trust. I'm the executor. The funds are nearly depleted. In exactly 32 days, the final tax payment will be made. After that, the account will be empty. And he was also right about Blackwood Development. She gestured to a thick file on the corner of her desk. They've been circling for years. They send a junior lawyer in here every 6 months, like clockwork. They know the trust is failing. They've already filed a preliminary lien with the county. The moment the trust defaults on the next tax payment, they have a motion ready to seize the property. My stomach sank. So they can just take it? It's more complicated than that. But yes, they have a strong legal position, she said. They'll claim it's an abandoned, derelict property, and that their seizure is in the county's best interest for development and tax revenue. It's a common tactic they use to acquire land from families without the resources to fight back. She paused, her gaze unwavering. They've also made a final offer. They sent it to my office last week, as per the trust's instructions. She slid a crisp, white envelope across the desk. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the Blackwood Development logo at the top. It was a formal offer to purchase the 500-acre Halloway Ranch for the sum of $50,000. $50,000. The number exploded in my mind. To a kid who had just been handed $200 as his life savings, $50,000 was a fortune. It was a staggering amount of money. It was a ticket to a new life, a clean break. I could walk away from Redemption Creek, from the dilapidated house, from the fight I didn't know how to win. I could go to college, get an apartment, be a normal person. It was an easy out. A golden door swinging open right in front of me. Miss Albright watched me, her expression unreadable. It's a lowball offer, she said quietly. That land, with the water rights and potential mineral deposits your grandfather always suspected were there, is worth at least 10 times that, probably more. But $50,000 is a lot of money to a young man starting with nothing. It's a guaranteed exit. The alternative, The alternative is a fight against a multi-million-dollar corporation with a team of ruthless lawyers. A fight we would most likely lose. She let the words hang in the air. The choice was mine. A choice between a comfortable, easy escape and a difficult, probably hopeless, battle for a memory. I looked down at the offer, the clean black ink on the expensive paper. It represented safety, a future without struggle. Then I thought of my grandfather's letter, of the sacrifice he made. I thought of him sitting at his desk, writing to a grandson he might never see again, trusting that I would one day come home and understand. I thought of the words, "Be strong, son." I left Miss Albright's office with the offer from Blackwood Development folded in my pocket. It felt like a hot coal against my leg. She had given me her card and told me to take a few days to think, to let her know my decision. The choice felt impossibly heavy. All the way back to the ranch, my mind was a battlefield. $50,000. The number chanted itself over and over. It was freedom. It was a new start, completely untethered from the past, from the pain, from the ghost of a family I never truly had. I could be anonymous again, but this time with a safety net. When I reached the house, it looked different in the fading afternoon light. It seemed to be watching me, waiting for my verdict. Was it a home, or was it just a burden, a legacy, or a trap? I let myself in and wandered through the silent, dusty rooms. The Blackwood offer a constant, nagging presence in my mind. I imagined what I could do with the money. An apartment in a city where no one knew my name, a steady job, maybe even school. A life of quiet, simple normalcy, something I had craved for a decade. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper. I would be selling a pile of rotting wood and overgrown land that had brought my family nothing but pain. It seemed like the logical choice, the sane choice, but something held me back. I went back to my grandfather's study, to the roll-top desk. I sat in his chair, running my hands over the worn wood. I thought of him in this chair, writing that first letter to me, his heart breaking as he planned to send me away. Was a clean break really what he would have wanted for me? He had spent the last years of his life protecting this place, paying for it from the shadows, all on the faith that I would one day return. Selling it felt like a betrayal. It felt like agreeing with the world's assessment of me, that I was just a kid from the system, looking for the easy way out. I couldn't decide. My head and my heart were at war. Needing to escape the suffocating silence of the house, I went outside and started walking the property line, trying to understand what I was fighting for, or what I would be giving up. The land was beautiful, wild and untamed. Rolling hills covered in sagebrush gave way to thick stands of aspen and pine. A clear, cold creek cut through the valley. It was a kingdom of silence and beauty, but it was also a kingdom I had no idea how to rule. I ended up at the barn. It was a huge, magnificent structure. Even in its state of disrepair, the red paint had mostly peeled away, and the great doors hung slightly askew, but it was built from massive timbers and had an air of permanence the house lacked. I managed to heave one of the doors open and stepped inside. The interior was vast and cathedral-like, with beams of light cutting through the gaps in the roof, illuminating a cavern of hay-scented air. Old farm equipment sat rusting in the shadows. Stalls stood empty. In the center of the floor was an old, dilapidated pickup truck, the one I vaguely remembered from my childhood. I climbed a rickety ladder to the hayloft. It was cooler up here, the air thick with the sweet smell of ancient hay. And it was in the far corner of the loft, tucked away under a heavy canvas tarp, that I found it. A large, wooden steamer trunk. It wasn't locked. I lifted the heavy lid, and my breath caught. It was filled with my grandfather's life. There were stacks of journals bound in worn leather, photo albums filled with black and white pictures of him and my grandmother, young and smiling. Pictures of my father as a boy, growing up on this very land, and then pictures of my parents together, holding me as a baby, a family, my family. I had never seen most of these photos before. I sat on the floor of the hayloft, pulling out journal after journal. My grandfather's handwriting filled the pages, documenting decades of life on the ranch. He wrote about the seasons, the struggles with money, his love for my grandmother, his pride in my father. And then I found the later journals. The entries grew darker. He wrote about the arrival of the Blackwood surveyors. He documented their threats, their intimidation tactics. He wrote about his growing suspicions surrounding my parents' car crash on a clear, dry day. He had reported it, but the local sheriff at the time had dismissed it as a tragic accident. And then he wrote about me. Pages and pages filled with his agony over the decision to send me away. He detailed every step of setting up the trust, selling off his equipment, his truck, everything of value to fund it, all to keep the ranch safe for me. Tucked into the last journal was a folded geological survey map. It showed the Holloway property, and marked across it in red were massive deposits of silver and copper. It was worth millions. And with the map was one final letter, the paper so thin it was almost translucent. Leo, if you have found this, you have found the heart of the matter. The money is a trap. It is the price they are willing to pay to erase us, to turn our home into a hole in the ground and our story into dust. The land is your anchor, son. It's not just dirt and rock. It's our memory. It's your grandmother's garden, your father's first steps, your own laughter echoing in the trees. Don't let them buy our soul for a pittance. The choice is yours, and yours alone. I will not blame you if you take the money and run. God knows you deserve an easy life after the one you've had. But I want you to know what you would be selling. It's a choice between a fleeting comfort and a home that will last you a lifetime. I believe in the man you are. I believe you'll make the right choice. Your loving grandfather, Arthur. I held the letter in one hand and the survey map in the other. The $50,000 offer felt like an insult, a joke. It was hush money. It was the price of my silence, the cost of my family's erasure. I looked at the photos of my parents, at the image of my grandfather, his eyes so full of strength and love. The war inside me was over. There was no choice left to make. I crumpled the Blackwood offer in my fist. I wasn't just staying. I was fighting. For the land, for my family, for the grandfather who had believed in me across a decade of silence. This wasn't just my inheritance, it was my identity, and it wasn't for sale. The next morning, I walked back into Evelyn Albright's office. I didn't have an appointment. I placed the crumpled Blackwood offer on her desk, along with my grandfather's journals, the photo albums, and the geological survey map. She looked at the items, then up at me, an eyebrow raised. Quote, 50 highs, I said. My voice was firm, clear. Quote, 51. For the first time, I saw her smile. It was a small, tight-lipped smile, but it was genuine. Quote, he's a 52, she said. Quote, ante kohof and 53. Quote, 54, I said, my resolve hardening. Quote, dato, 35. She spent the next hour looking through the journals, her expression growing more and more grim. Quote, 56. She murmured, tracing a line of my grandfather's script with her finger. He documented everything, dates, names, conversations. It's a detailed record of corporate harassment. It might not be enough to win a lawsuit, but it's enough to cause them a serious public relations problem if it ever got out. She looked at the survey map. And this gives us leverage. They don't know we know the true value of the land." Her mind was already working, formulating a strategy. "Okay," she said, all business again. "We have less than a month. Our first priority is to stop them from seizing the property when the trust defaults. A standard injunction won't be enough. We need something more creative, something that ties the ranch to the community." She tapped her pen on the desk. "He mentioned a historical preservation claim. That could work. Declaring the ranch a century-old family homestead could tie them up in bureaucratic red tape for years. It's a long shot, but it's a start." She agreed to represent me pro bono, taking her fees from any future profits the ranch might generate. It was an incredible act of faith, a testament to the loyalty my grandfather had inspired. I left her office feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I had an ally, I had a plan. But I also had no money and a mountain of work ahead of me. I went back to the ranch with a new perspective. It wasn't just a place to live. It was my fortress, my base of operations. I started cleaning, really cleaning. I hauled the dusty sheets off the furniture, beat the dust out of the rugs, and washed the windows until the mountain views were crystal clear. I spent days just organizing, throwing out what was truly ruined and carefully preserving what was left of my family's life. The work was grueling, but with every bit of dust I wiped away, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my own history. But cleaning didn't pay for food. My $200 was dwindling fast. I needed to find work. I swallowed my pride and went back to the diner in town. The same kind-faced waitress was there. She asked. I nodded. "News traveled fast in a town this small," I said. Quote, 65. She gave me a long, appraising look, then smiled. Quote, 66. And just like that, I had a job. The work was hot and tedious, but the pay was steady, and it came with a free meal at the end of every shift. It was at the diner that I started to meet people. The ranchers who came in for coffee at dawn, the shopkeepers on their lunch breaks. At first, they were wary of me, the silent kid from out of town. But when they found out I was Arthur Halloway's grandson, and that I was trying to save the ranch from Blackwood, their attitudes changed. One evening, an old rancher named Jeb, the same man who had spoken to me on my first day, sat down at the counter while I was wiping it down. "I knew your grandfather," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We had our disagreements, but he was an honest man. Blackwood tried to push me out too, years ago. Tried to cut off my water access. Arthur stood with me. He let me run a pipe from the creek on his land. Didn't charge me a dime. He looked me in the eye. If you need a hand with anything up at the ranch, fences, roofing, you let me know. A Halloway helped me once. It's time I returned the favor." It was a small moment, but it changed everything. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was part of a community, a web of relationships and shared histories my grandfather had built. The people of Redemption Creek had long memories. They remembered who had stood with them and who had tried to crush them, and in their quiet, stubborn way they were choosing a side, my side. The fight was still daunting, but for the first time since stepping off that bus I didn't feel completely alone. The days leading up to the deadline were a blur of frantic activity. By day, I worked at the ranch, patching the roof with Jeb, mending fences with another neighboring rancher, and clearing decades of overgrowth. My hands, once soft and unused to labor, became calloused and strong. By night, I worked at the diner, saving every dollar I could. In the few spare hours I had, I sat with Ms. Albright, going over the historical preservation paperwork, poring over my grandfather's journals for any detail that might help our case. We were building a defense brick by brick, but we both knew it was a flimsy one. Blackwood's legal team could likely dismantle it in a single afternoon. We needed something more solid, a silver bullet. I was in the barn one afternoon, organizing the old tools when I stumbled upon it. Tucked away in a dusty corner was a small wooden filing cabinet I had overlooked. It was filled with old account ledgers. I almost dismissed them as worthless, but something made me pull one out and open it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat, precise handwriting, documenting transactions from years ago. Most of it was farm-related, sales of hay, costs of feed. But then I saw a series of entries that were different. They were regular monthly payments received from several local ranchers, including Jeb. The memo line for each payment read, quote, 70, quote. I stared at the page, my mind racing. I remembered what Jeb had told me about my grandfather letting him run a pipe from the creek. It wasn't a gift, it was a formal business arrangement. I flipped through the ledgers. There were contracts and payment records for 5 different ranches, all of them drawing water from the spring-fed creek that originated on Halloway land. These weren't just handshake deals, they were documented, long-standing commercial agreements. I grabbed the ledgers and ran the 5 miles to town. I burst into Miss Albright's office, out of breath, and spread the books across her desk. Look, I panted. He wasn't just living here, he was running a business. A small one, but it's real. She put on her glasses and began to study the pages. A slow smile spread across her face. "Oh, Arthur, you clever old fox," she whispered. "This is it, Leo. This is our silver bullet." "I don't understand," I said. "How does this help?" Blackwood's entire case is built on the premise that the ranch is abandoned and non-productive, she explained, her voice electric with excitement. But this proves it's an active commercial enterprise. More than that, it's an enterprise that is vital to the local community. 5 ranches, including some of the largest in the county, depend on this water source. If Blackwood seizes the property and cuts off the water, they won't just be fighting one kid with a sad story. They'll be fighting the entire Redemption Creek Ranchers Association. Politically, that's a nightmare for them. This was the shield my grandfather had built. It wasn't just about historical preservation, it was about economic necessity. He had woven the ranch into the very fabric of the community, making it indispensable. With 2 days to spare before the trust ran out, Miss Albright drafted a letter to Blackwood's legal team. It was a masterpiece of polite, professional aggression. She informed them that their motion to seize the property would be met with a multi-pronged legal challenge. We would be filing for historical landmark status. We would be presenting my grandfather's journals as evidence of a decade-long campaign of harassment. And, most importantly, we would be filing a joint injunction with the 5 other ranches to protect the established water rights that were crucial to the local economy. She attached copies of the water lease agreements and a list of the ranchers who were prepared to testify. Her closing paragraph was perfect. Quote, 7-9. It was a bluff, but a powerful one. We were daring them to fight a war on multiple fronts, a war that would paint them as a predatory corporation, bullying not just an orphan, but an entire rural community. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. We heard nothing. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just sat on the porch of the ranch watching the sun set behind the mountains, wondering if it was the last time I'd see it as my own. The next afternoon, the phone in Miss Albright's office rang. It was Blackwood's senior counsel. The conversation was brief. They were withdrawing their lien. They were backing off. When she told me, I didn't cheer, I didn't shout. I just sat down on the steps of her office and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 10 years. We had won. The ranch was safe. It was mine. The victory wasn't a grand cinematic explosion. It was a quiet, profound sense of peace. Blackwood Development didn't disappear, Their shadows still lingered over the valley, but they were gone for now. The fight had drained me, but it had also forged me into someone new. I was no longer the invisible boy from the system. I was Leo Holloway, owner of the Holloway Ranch. But owning it and running it were two different things. The legal victory didn't magically fix the leaking roof or the broken fences. It didn't put money in my pocket. The reality was that I was still broke, and the ranch was still a massive, crumbling responsibility. But now, it was a responsibility I chose. I went back to the ledgers and reinstated the water lease agreements with the ranchers. The income was modest, just enough to cover the new property taxes and buy basic supplies. I kept my job at the diner. My life became a rhythm of hard, physical work. Mornings were for the ranch, mending, building, planting a small vegetable garden in the same spot my grandmother's had been. Afternoons and evenings were for my job in town. It was an exhausting, lonely existence in many ways. The house was big and quiet, and the ghosts of my family were my only constant companions. But the loneliness was different now. It wasn't the empty, desolate loneliness of the institution. It was a peaceful solitude, earned and chosen. I was building something. With every nail I hammered and every fence post I set, I was pouring my own sweat and effort into the foundation my grandfather had left me. I was making the ranch mine, not just by deed but by heart. The community, seeing my commitment, rallied around me in small ways. Jeb would leave a box of old tools on my porch. The waitress from the diner would pack me extra food. People would stop me on the street and ask how the ranch was coming along. I was no longer an outsider. I was becoming part of the town's story, just as my grandfather had been. Months passed, turning into a year. The house slowly came back to life. The fields were cleaner, the barn more secure. I wasn't getting rich, I wasn't living an easy life, but I was living a life with meaning. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, watching the last light of the sun paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The air was crisp and cool. I held the original faded photograph in my hand, the one that had started it all. I looked from the image of the vibrant, happy home to the real thing in front of me. Still scarred, still imperfect, but standing. Standing because of my grandfather's love and because of my choice to fight. They told me I owned nothing but a photograph. And for a long time, I believed them. I thought inheritance was something you were given, a pile of money or a deed to a property. But what I learned out here, under this big Wyoming sky, is that the most important things we inherit can't be held in our hands. They're the stories we carry, the strength we find when we're tested, and the choices we make when everything is on the line. My grandfather didn't leave me a fortune. He left me a legacy of resilience. He left me a chance to build a life with purpose, rooted in a place that mattered. The scars from my past, from the years of feeling abandoned, they're still there. They always will be. But they don't define me anymore. The silence of this ranch isn't empty, it's full of peace. Home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you choose, it's a place you build, and sometimes it's a place you have to fight for with everything you have. What did this story teach you about the meaning of home? What is the inheritance, not of money, but of spirit, that you carry in your own life? Share your story in the comments below. This channel is for all of us, who might have started with what felt like nothing, but decided to build something anyway. If that's you, subscribe and become part of this community. You're not alone. We're all just trying to find our way back to a place that feels like it's truly ours.